With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right. Even if the whole world is telling you to move. It is your duty to plant yourself like a tree. Look them in the eye and say no. You move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for being with us on this special edition, this Friday edition of Tactics, whether you're joining us on YouTube, on Twitch, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Periscope, however you're watching us, however you're listening to us, or if it's Saturday, you're listening to us on the terrestrial signal on News Radio 1440 AM. We certainly appreciate you being a part of, letting us be a part of your day, and we certainly, as always, appreciate you listening to our program. The new numbers are in, everything's looking really good, and I would really like to thank my audience for helping this program grow. It's been an uphill battle, but we have been doing very well here at Tactics, where speech isn't violence, tolerance isn't love, and disagreement isn't hate. We do welcome you to the program, as always, and you may be thinking there, because I know what you're thinking. I know my audience. I know exactly what you're thinking. You're thinking, dang, Caleb, that is a really, really big picture of Nikki Haley. And yeah, you're right. And by the way, normally my backgrounds, I use a green screen through the magic of internet, but that's not a green screen. That's an actual picture of Nikki Haley. And just to give you a little bit of the rundown, and we are going to talk about the Faulkner benefit dinner. That is our top story of the day, Nikki Haley being right here in the capital city of Montgomery the other night. But yeah, that gigantic background that is so large, I had to move my camera back just to get everything in the shot. That was actually commandeered, and by commandeered, I mean taken by one of my friends over here, one of the guys, he's actually one of my flunkies, one of the guys that works for me, and you might be meeting him on the air soon because he's expressed some interest in being a producer for this show, so you might get to see that at some point. But you know, they have so much promotional stuff for the benefit dinner, and when they finally do conclude the benefit dinner, they have no use for the promotional stuff because it's over. It's no point in promoting something that's already happened. So they just kind of give away all the stuff to anybody that wants it because it's going to wind up in the trash afterward anyway. So, yeah, one of my guys that lives here in the building with me here at Faulkner, he just decided he was going to up and take that. So he's letting me borrow it. Thanks to Ethan for helping me out with that. But yeah, this thing is massive. You wouldn't believe how long it took me to get this room set up just to get it all in the shot. But we certainly do appreciate Ambassador Haley, Governor Haley, whichever moniker she wants to go by. Here's the thing. Everybody refers to her now as Ambassador Haley because she, of course, was the ambassador to the UN. But the truth is, I've always thought as governor as being a higher office anyway. And I guess that comes from me having more of a federalism background and believing in state sovereignty. But I mean, obviously the president is above and holds more power, at least federally, than the governors do. But I've always thought of governor, like pretty much any kind of cabinet position or Congress position would be a step down from governor in my estimation. But, you know, whatever. They don't really ask me about that stuff. But Ambassador Haley is how they introduced her last night. I really thought that they should have gone with governor. But, you know, that's splitting hairs. Either way, it was a great event. Great food. I actually didn't eat any of the food. I was with the press up in the press box, but I heard that the dinner was amazing. There were some great performances there by Faulkner grads. One thing that was really cool is they showed several graduates of Faulkner and them talking about their childhood dreams and then fast forwarding later. And some of them were very esteemed people, things that you would expect. And they had a person that her childhood dream was to be a doctor, specifically one that worked at St. Jude, and now she's a Faulkner graduate that works as a physician at St. Jude. There was another woman who wanted to be in the military, and now she's a very high-ranking officer in the Air Force. They had another one who wanted to teach kids, and I love that they did this because, especially when it comes to teachers, that's not something that you think of as prestigious. That's not necessarily something you think of as, oh, they're a doctor or a lawyer. But every doctor or lawyer we ever had owes a great deal of their knowledge and skill and expertise to teachers. And yes, they're professors as well. I'm not saying that they don't play a large role in it, but they're high school and elementary teachers too. Whether that was their own parent because they homeschooled or public or private school, whatever, it doesn't matter. Your teachers have a huge influence on your life. And I thought that was really cool that they paid homage to someone who has been a teacher here in the Montgomery public school system for a very long time. And she's a Faulkner graduate, been teaching, I think she's a 27-year veteran, 27, 29, something like that. They talked about it last night. I'd have to look at it again. Don't quote me on that. But I just thought that was really neat that they highlighted a teacher who had graduated from Faulkner as well. And I'm proud to be associated with the university. And who knows, maybe one day I'll even wind up teaching here. Went here for a while myself, worked with some really good people here. I'd love to wind up, you could do a lot worse than wind up teaching here, but we'll see where that goes. But anyway, it was a really great event. Faulkner also unveiled their new logo, which is pretty cool. You can check it out on their website. They sort of unveiled it last night and used it and all the stuff, their new academic logo, which nothing wrong with the old one. I like the old one with the spire in it, but hey, they wanted to update and it looks good. I like it. I like the new logo. In fact, they handed me a lapel pin, so I'll be wearing that from time to time on here as well. But I do have to get to something else before I get into the meat and potatoes of what Governor Haley was talking about last night. I messed up. And I messed up in some of my coverage because I tweeted out because I thought it was funny, and it was funny. But what I tweeted out the other night was that Todd Strange was on the stage, our mayor, Todd Strange, and he was announcing and introducing Governor Haley before she came on stage. And one of the things that he talked about was, because it was a running theme, powerful women in leadership roles, that kind of thing, which, it's Nikki Haley, that's appropriate. And so one of the things that was brought up was, of course, the 19th Amendment, which allowed women to vote. And the way that the sentence was phrased that the speaker gave was, the 19th Amendment, which started the worldwide movement to end women's suffrage. No, Mayor Strange, that's not how it goes. Women's suffrage is the right to vote. The women's suffrage movement were the people that wanted women to be able to vote. So that's the exact opposite, actually, of what you were saying. But here's the thing. That wasn't Mayor Strange that said that. It was actually our own President Williams. What happened is President Williams was talking about Mayor Strange. I thought he was giving Mayor Strange an introduction, and I had to go back into the press room, so I only heard, I didn't see who was saying it. So when I heard the voice say that, I assumed it was Mayor Strange. So I'd like to issue Mayor Strange a formal apology, because I went on Twitter and Facebook and poked fun at him. It wasn't malicious, even if it had been Mayor Strange, but, just poking a little fun, because it was misworded. But the thing is, I got that wrong, and I attributed it to Todd Strange when it was actually my new boss, President Mike Williams of Faulkner. So I do want to point this out. Yes, I am going on the air and publicly poking fun at my boss. I understand that I am doing that, but I want to point out that the whole reason that I'm bringing that up on the air is because I am also pointing out that I screwed up and attributed the quote to somebody who did not say it. So, we're all human. Stuff like that happens. It was a funny moment. I'm sure that a lot of people that realized that he said the opposite of what he meant to say got a nice chuckle out of it, but we all knew what he meant. And hopefully people will forgive me for attributing that quote to the wrong person. But just, remember that. So Nikki Haley, of course, came up to the stage, and she was the main draw of the event, which is appropriate. And she talked about several things. I'm not going to give you a summary of the entire speech because A, it's not my job, and B, you can watch the speech yourself. So I'm just going to kind of elaborate on a couple of her key points. So first of all, a big theme of the night, as I said, was female empowerment and women in leadership roles, which, again, I felt was very appropriate. I think that that was a good theme considering who our speaker was, and Nikki Haley is not somebody that shies away from the lessons that we can learn from that. And the story that she started out with, which I thought was just phenomenal, was a story about her mother and how her mother in India was somebody that was on the fast track to become a lawyer and wound up not being able to become a judge just because she was female, but she actually wound up giving up her law career. And this is a woman who went through law school, very high marks, very impressed by her colleagues, and you know that that's something that I'm very familiar with considering one of my former co-hosts, Laura Clark now, used to be Glidewell, is a female lawyer as well. And so that's a theme that I'm familiar with. A lot of my actually about half my lawyer friends happen to be women. So that's something that I'm accustomed to. But it's not something that was very common in India, which is something that Haley made it a point to emphasize to the people within the sound of her voice last night. And it really was made so when she couldn't become a judge just because she happened to be a female, regardless of her expertise, regardless of her high grades, regardless of her legal skill and knowledge. She was barred from that. And it amazes me that the thing that she admires about her mother is not that she bucked the system, even though she did, and then went on to become a judge, which she did not, even though it's something that she wanted to do. She decided to give up the possibility of becoming a judge. Even coming to America, she ended her law career and wound up running a business instead because it was what was best for her family. She wanted to do something where she could be with her family and put her family first. And that's something that Haley herself, in a later story, sort of conveyed was part of the reason that she wound up resigning and stepping down from her position as the UN ambassador, because she had to put her family first. And that's a theme that I think is so important and people really need to hear nowadays. Because there is a lie that has been perpetuated, and it's not fair to our young men or our young women, that when you go out into the world, you can have it all. You can be incredibly dedicated to your career, you can climb the corporate ladder, and you can be the absolute pinnacle of success in the business world, and also be the pinnacle of success with your family. I'm not saying that a person can't necessarily do that, but what I am saying is we treat it as though there are not trade-offs. Now, there are careers that you can be very wealthy and still have plenty of time for your family, and the people that can do that, hey, more power to them. I'm not trying to bash or degrade anybody. I'm not trying to say that you're a bad parent if you have a bustling career. I'm not saying that you are a bad employee if you have a very active family life, which you put first. I'm not saying either of those things. But I'm saying we have to be realistic and tell people the truth, which is there are trade-offs. There are going to be times that if you want to put your career first, or you want to make your career a priority, your family is going to feel the repercussions of that, and vice versa. There are going to be times if you want to put your family first, that your career is going to have to take a back seat, and there may be some things that you get passed over for, there may be some things that you don't necessarily get to do career-wise because you have to take care of your family. And I get that that's a situation-by-situation thing, it's different for different people, I get that. But I'm saying we continually lie to people that they can do everything that they want to in their career and everything that they want to with their family, and it's not true. And see, the thing that Nikki Haley remembers about her mother is that she was on the fast track to being, a very prosperous lawyer with a fulfilling career, but she determined that as good as that was, her family was more important. And because she decided that, she gave her children, like Nikki, she gave them a chance to achieve a lot of the dreams that she never did. And that is heroic. The fact that you're willing to sacrifice a part of your life for somebody else because you love them, because you care about them, and because it's the right thing to do, that is a heroic act. May not get you a whole lot of fame, may not end with a whole lot of people knowing who you are, but you'll be a hero to the people that matters. And I find it fascinating that at a night dedicated to female empowerment, female leadership, women in leadership roles, Nikki Haley's hero, and something that she implements in her own life when she had to take a step back from being the UN ambassador to fulfill her role as a daughter and a mother, even when women have those leadership roles, she still primarily understood that her first priority should be to her family. There is a very feminine quality about that. And I'm in no way implying that men shouldn't put their families on a pedestal and do the best that they can for them. I'm just saying that there is a difference there. There is a distinction there. That women, as a general rule, are willing to sacrifice their careers a little bit more than most men are for their family. And that is something to be applauded. And there are men that make sacrifices in their career for their family all the time. I'm not saying they're not. But I'm saying that is a very feminine thing to do. It is a feminine quality to be proud of your status as a mother and a wife and a daughter and a caregiver and somebody that puts the needs of others ahead of yourself. It's a heroic quality that, frankly, men are just not as good at as women. I mean, yeah, we do some self-sacrifice, especially when it comes to physical danger. That we're a little bit more prone to than women. But by and large, the day-to-day caregiving, that's something that women are just better at doing. And they should be applauded for that. Of course, there's exceptions, and of course, there's some women that are not great at caregiving, just like there are some men that are not physically strong. Of course, that's part of it. Some men are not great providers. That is true. But as a general rule, when we're talking in generalities, that's something that women excel at, and Nikki Haley didn't shy away from that. She put it on the forefront. That even somebody that is seen as a world leader, somebody that's in an incredibly important position, still puts being a wife and a mother first. And that's a positive thing. That's a point in her favor. Another thing that she pointed out, which I thought was fascinating, she said that identity politics was something that had been hurting her for as long as she could remember. Remember, she's Indian. Her father's Indian, her mother's Indian. And she was born in South Carolina, but she's, of course, genetically still Indian. And when she was a little girl, they were entered into a beauty pageant. And this particular beauty pageant, to try to be, I guess, politically correct, they had a white winner and a black winner. Well, she didn't fit into one of those categories, and she and her sister were the only Indian girls there, and so they just kind of sent them away with a participation trophy because they didn't have a division for them to compete in. And she just gave that as an example of how very early on in her life, identity politics is something that has hurt her, that they've stuck her into a category and they graded her on a different scale than everybody else. And that's the reason that this identity politics garbage is so messed up, because it does exactly that. You are whatever label they put on you first, and then an individual, not an individual first. And that's really where this comes into a problem. Now, the overarching theme of the evening, which is what we're going to spend a great deal of our time on here, that Nikki Haley wanted to emphasize, is that America is good. And because America is good, because America is the moral compass of the world, we should be the ones leading. Now, when she goes through this to emphasize why America is the moral compass, one of the things that she pointed out is that, for example, the Sudan, and she has sat across, to use her own words, she has sat across some of the most evil, wicked regimes in human history. Sat across the table from them. The Sudan actually uses rape as a weapon of war. This is something that they use to threaten people, that if they do not comply with whatever it is that they want to do, their troops are going to come in and their men are going to be killed and their women are going to be raped. And she even gave one story, I believe this one happened in Iran, where because a woman disagreed with somebody, they took her baby from her, threw it into a fire, and forced her to eat her own child. I mean, just horrific, evil stuff. Stuff that you wouldn't even think of to put in a horror movie. And yet these are the things that are going on. And then she contrasted that to the very low technology, the barbarism of some of these Middle Eastern nations, to the very high-tech barbarism, that's the better way to say that, barbarism, of locations like China. Now, China's high-tech, but they're using that technology to enslave people. They want to go the route of 1984, creating a totalitarian surveillance state. And her point in all of that was, it's not whether a country is low tech and stuck in the past, like a lot of these Middle Eastern countries are. They're stuck in, the 7th century. It's not necessarily just them. It's also the high tech nations. China's a first world technologically advanced nation, but they are creating a gigantic surveillance state, which is run by an evil communist regime. And so it's not the level of technology, which is a good theme to hit on, because here's the thing. There's been a lie told in progressivism that humans naturally progress, and we progress past certain stages. And yes, mankind has problems, but it's always on an upward trajectory. Well, any student of history knows that's a load of crap. I mean, you look at, for example, the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages, the Dark Ages as they're called, were largely the result of the fall of Rome. The fall of the Roman Empire, which for a brief moment had some semblance of human liberty and dignity, and status as an individual citizen, that all went away and was lost for centuries because people moved to a system that did not honor individual liberty. I mean, if Rome had actually held it together and had not gone to an emperor instead of having the Senate like they did, there's no way to tell what might have been, but the human race may have been ahead of itself by nearly 1,000 years, and it just didn't. We regressed. And China, I believe, is in danger of doing exactly that. Because when nations, and this was a running theme of her speech last night as well, when nations ignore the God-given natural rights that people are entitled to from birth, then their totalitarianism tends to wind up causing them to spiral into regression. And that was something that she talked about quite a bit. And this is the reason that she brought up this point too, which I thought was a fantastic takeaway line. We can't be the world's nanny or policeman, but she said, but if we don't lead, who's going to? And I understand that, because I don't want to be the world's nanny or policeman. Believe me, my natural instinct, especially as somebody who identifies as kind of libertarian, I really want to be an isolationist. I mean, my instinct, not saying that I believe this every time, because sometimes there's compelling evidence that points me in the other direction, but my natural default setting is to say, well, as long as they're not bombing us, why don't we stay away? That really is my natural inclination. I don't want to get involved in other people's affairs. I'd just as soon America be basically a very strong fortress. That we don't really venture outside of our fortress, but, we don't go nation building, but we better make clear that nobody screws with us. That would be Caleb Colquitt's foreign policy in a nutshell. Obviously, there's more to it than that, but that's the synopsis. Nikki Haley is saying she doesn't want to be the world's policeman or the nanny either. Walking around thumping people when they get out of line, that's not really what America should be. But if we're not leading, then someone is going to take up that role. And if somebody else does, who is it going to be? Because if it's Sudan, or if it's China, or if it's Russia, that makes a much bleaker, less free world. And she's right. America's far from perfect. And goodness knows that, we need every bit of help that we can get. But one thing she said is that even on our worst day, we're blessed to be Americans. And that's the truth. That even when America is at its worst, it's still the greatest, freest country in human history. Sure, we've made mistakes. We're a country of human beings too. We don't get everything right. But you look at America and compare it to literally everything else in the whole of human history, we're still the best. We're the most free. We have the most economic freedom, the most personal liberty. We were the country to get rid of slavery the fastest, not the earliest, the fastest in our existence. But when you understand that, and when you're a real student of world history, you start seeing that over and over again. And because of that, America does have to be in a leadership position, because if it's not us, it's going to be somebody. And the other options are not good. In a similar way, I think that this reminds me of George Washington. Because do you know what George Washington's reaction was when they asked him to be president? His immediate response was, "Have I not done enough for my country?" That was his sentiment. He wanted nothing more than to retire and live on his farm in Mount Vernon. That's what he wanted to do. But he knew that if he didn't lead, somebody else was going to, and he was best suited for the job. Not that there weren't other people that would have been good at it. John Adams would have been okay. Thomas Jefferson would have been okay, and eventually they did fulfill that role. But George Washington understood that it was his role. He was the person that he knew was best suited for the job, and because of that, it was his responsibility, because he had that ability. It was his responsibility to take on that leadership role, even though it was not what he wanted to do. And that's exactly the way I think that, by and large, American leadership should work. We don't necessarily want to do it. We'd rather just do our own thing on our own little plot of land, but our moral obligation is to lead the world. Not rule the world, but lead the world. And I know that that's a difficult balancing act to strike sometimes. But I think that if we took that lesson from George Washington, as Nikki Haley seems to suggest, that we'd be a lot better off. And one of the examples that she gave for this is that there were people that were actually thanking her during the Assad chemical strike. You remember that happened during her tenure as the UN ambassador, that Bashar Assad actually fired chemical weapons on his own people. And regardless of how you felt about that, regardless of whether you or not you believe that our response to that was appropriate, I think that it was handled pretty well. There were people that Nikki Haley said, world leaders, people that on the world stage didn't appear to be very pro-American, that came to her and thanked her for America taking charge and leading on that. And I think that that is because world leaders understand that for whatever misgivings and conflicts arise between them and the United States, America still is the best one, that is the most suited and the most capable of leading the world in a time of crisis like that. We've made mistakes on that front for sure. But it's better that we lead than somebody else at this point. And really a great example of that was one that she used last night, which is when you stop respecting human rights, when you stop respecting the individual's right to life, liberty, and property, what happens is the same thing that we've seen play out on our TV screens, in the news, in history over and over again. You get the Soviet Union, you get Cuba, you get Venezuela, where poverty sets in. And this really brought her to her next point, which is, if we're going to solve poverty, if we're going to bring people out of squalor, by far the best vehicle to do so is capitalism. Doesn't mean it's perfect. Doesn't mean it works every single time, and that there's no problems once you invoke free market capitalism, because it is a system that does require a certain level of morality amongst the people that are living under it. It requires far less than just everybody being altruistic like socialism. But the point is, keeping a socialist system working does take some maintenance. And we understand that. But when you look at things like socialism and communism, they're broken from the onset and can't be fixed. I mean, it's the difference in having a car that sometimes needs repair and a car that isn't even designed to run. I mean, it's like it's missing its wheels. It doesn't do anything. And so you're a lot better off with the car that occasionally has to be fixed than you are with the one that wasn't even really designed to get you anywhere in the first place. And that's the thing. Over and over again, if you look throughout history, the vehicle that has been shown to take people out of poverty, granted it takes a little time, but the one that moves people to a better standard of living, a better life, is capitalism. If there are better suggestions out there, I am all in favor of hearing them, but I've yet to hear one so far that hasn't failed miserably in comparison. And the reason that she suggests that capitalism does this, the reason that it is the best tool that we have to bring people out of poverty, is because it allows for creativity. And when you have creativity, you have hope. Hope that your life can be improved, hope that you can do something better than what you're doing now. In the Soviet Union, your career was just chosen for you. They figured out what you would be best suited for, and you did that. What was your opinion? Didn't care. Because the only thing that mattered is your nation, comrade, needs you to do this. And so you did that. And you see similar things happening in Cambodia and Cuba and Venezuela. These countries that do that, they see people as cogs in a machine, not individuals. For all its flaws, capitalism looks at somebody and sees them as an individual capable of doing what they want. And says, you know what? You may be really good at math, but maybe you don't like it. Do what you want. And then they do, and because of that, they have hope. Hope that their life can improve, hope that they can do something better the next day. And you get the society that you have seen around us. And because those people can be what they want to be, they have that hope, and it creates a better life for them, a better life for their children, and a better life for the people around them, because to make money and to chase that hope that they have, that pursuit of happiness, because they have the ability to do that, they are motivated to serve their fellow man in order to get there. That's the way that capitalism works on its best day. And that's one thing that Nikki Haley had to do herself. When she did resign from her post as the ambassador to the UN, and I hated to see her go because, as I said many times on the air, and I still say to this day that I said this before Ben Shapiro did, I think that Ben Shapiro is watching my show and ripping me off. I'm sure that's happening. That Nikki Haley is my spirit animal. I mean, some of her speeches on the floor of the UN are just absolutely phenomenal. The way that she handles herself with poise and grace, but also gets her point across and doesn't take crap off of anybody. I mean, she's the epitome of a Southern woman, which is hilarious because she's also the children of immigrants. So she's not genetically Southern, but she's culturally Southern. And what I mean by that is she will chew you up and spit you out and do it with a smile on her face. Southern women can just do that, man. I mean, if you live in the South, you know. That's why they have phrases like, oh, bless your heart, and I love him to death, but. Because, man, they can smack you upside the head and do it, with heels on and smiling and looking pretty. That's just who they are. My mama was like that. My grandmama was like that. My sister is like that. It's just a Southern thing. And Nikki Haley, she just has it down, and she brought that to the UN in full force. And it was on display last night, but she said the reason that she had to resign is to put her family first. So even though she was somebody that had reached the upper echelons of power, I mean, she's an actual cabinet member in the president's cabinet and has Trump's ear on a number of times, which, by the way, that was fascinating. She talked about that a little bit last night, too, and said, I always felt heard. Contrary to popular belief, Donald Trump actually does listen to people around him. And sometimes he disagreed with me, And sometimes my plan didn't go through because he wanted to do something different. But the point is, he always listened to me, he listened to my suggestions, and he took them seriously and under consideration, which was a pretty good compliment to the president, actually. But Nikki Haley, she decided that because it was no longer what was right for her family, and because she said you have to be selfless enough that when you feel yourself fade, you let somebody else take that position. When you feel yourself not really on top of your game, you're not as sharp as you were at the beginning. And I think that probably had a lot to do with their family issues. That when that happens, you have to take a step back. And there was two takeaways from that line that I really thought about. The first is that Nikki Haley is modeling what she talked about at the beginning with her mom being her role model, which is, as much as I love my career, as much as I love my country, my family comes first. That's impressive. And it's a very motherly thing to do. It might be the most motherly thing a person can do. And I love the fact that even though she's this very strong, powerful, confident woman, she also doesn't want to be indistinguishable from a man. She takes pride in and exudes her femininity, which is something that a lot of the leaders on the left don't do. A lot of the females on the left that want to be powerful and strong, they just emulate men. They try to be basically indistinguishable from their male counterparts, and that's a mistake. Nikki Haley does the exact opposite, and I think it comes off so much better. But the fact that she saw that in herself, and that because her family was what was most important to her, she decided that she had to take a step back from a job that most people would say she was crazy to take a step back from. Especially since she's one of the few cabinet members that has left that Donald Trump didn't just absolutely try to destroy after taking their leave. But I think the thing that makes Nikki Haley herself such an amazing role model, I think the thing that really seals that deal is that she believes in American values, and she's not ashamed of them. There are so many leaders, and I got so tired of this in the Obama administration. There are so many leaders in Washington, they feel like they have to apologize constantly for what America is. They don't like to paint in bold colors. They're kind of mealy-mouthed. They're like, oh yeah, well, America has a lot of problems, and we're real sorry about a lot of stuff. I'm not saying you never apologize. That comes with a level of humility, but you don't apologize all the time. As I said, America is still the greatest country in the history of the world, and we should act like it. I don't think that is unreasonable. We don't act like we're perfect. That would be a mistake. We also don't act like we can't learn things from other people. But I do think that this act where we go around apologizing to people constantly and walk around with our head hung and our tail between our legs like we've got something to be ashamed of, that's not right either. I want somebody like Nikki Haley that paints in red, white, and blue, really bold and proud of it. That's part of the reason that Trump got elected. And I'm guessing probably part of the reason that Trump appointed Nikki Haley is because she's the same way. And so when I look at that, I think the big takeaway was that if we're wanting other people to adopt America's values, if we want other people to look at America and say, wow, those guys have it figured out, there's something that we have to do. And that is, we have to be proud of who we are. We have to act like we believe in the product that we're selling. If we want other people to be freer and more respectful of people's individual rights, we have to act like we believe it. I say this as somebody that's an evangelist. If you are somebody that preaches the gospel of Christ and believes that it's a better way to live, you can't act like your life sucks all the time. Because if you do, people are going to say, well, why would I want to adopt that? That guy's miserable all the time. And that's one of the reasons that the Bible calls us to be joyful, content. This is the same way. If we want to be the world's leaders, and we should be, then we have to act like we believe in the product we're selling. And as a wise man once said, if you can't sell freedom, you suck. That was my big takeaway, I guess. All right, so before we go to a break, I do have this to mention. So, Cinnabon, you may remember that early on in my radio career, I had a co-host named Bear, Jacob Bear, and he and I used to talk about Cinnabon all the time because they were my first sponsor. Well, I swung by there today, and they wanted to, give me a free gift if I would give them a shout out, which I was more than happy to do because I love Cinnabon. And they gave me one of those giant pecan Cinnabons, which so good, so good. I just absolutely love it. They're, of course, located in the Eastdale Mall. And if you go by there tomorrow, just mention that you saw this ad and you can get 10% off. Just mention that you heard them on the radio or heard them on Tactics. Either way, you go there, say, hey, heard about you on the radio. They'll give you a 10% discount on whatever it is that you're getting. And this is really cool. They wanted me to promote a new product, which, again, I was more than happy to do because that means that I get to try it and sample it myself. So I'm going to give you the review. This is a chocolate chip cookie. That's right. Cinnabon is making cookies now. Oh, but it's not just a chocolate chip cookie. It is so much more than that because it is a chocolate chip cookie that has a cinnamon bun inside of it. I kid you not. So I figured it would be great if live on the air, just like I've done for some food products before, I'm actually going to try the new Cinnabon cinnamon bun cookie and see what this thing's like. So here we go. Oh my God. Oh my gosh. That is a mouthful. I'm sorry, I know you're hearing my chewing sounds there on the mic. Wow. All right, so here's my review. The chocolate chip cookie on the outside is a really good cookie. And just based on the texture and the flavor, this would be a really good cookie if it were just a standard chocolate chip cookie. So they didn't skimp on that. But here's what I was not expecting. The inside, it does have a cinnamon bun in it, but they didn't tell me that the cinnamon bun actually has the cinnamon bun icing in it as well. So it's not just a cinnamon bun. You can tell that there's actually icing on the inside of this thing. Oh, that is beyond delicious. Very, very creamy. And the chocolate chips are massive. Like these things are about the size of M&Ms almost. Like the standard original M&M, these chocolate chips are roughly the size of an M&M, maybe even a little bigger. Man, that is a phenomenal cookie. So, tell you what, in the Eastdale Mall tomorrow, go buy Cinnabon. It's only for this location, right here in Montgomery. So, if you're listening to us somewhere else in the Yellowhammer State, I'm sorry, you got to come to Montgomery to get this deal. But for sure, go into Cinnabon and tell them that you heard this ad on Tactics. It doesn't matter whether you heard it on the internet or on the radio. Just tell them that. They will give you 10% off your bill, and believe me, you will not walk away from that disappointed. In fact, if you're going to be in Eastdale Mall at all tomorrow, I don't see how anybody goes to the mall and doesn't get a Cinnabon because they have those big fans out there and you can smell the cinnamon bun. Oh, I mean, that's like the siren song. I can't resist it. But be sure to go by there. You'll get 10% off of your bill, and make sure to tell them Caleb sent you. We'll be back in just a minute.
Hey, where you going? Champ? Slugger? Hey, cowboy. Where you going? Where you going?
I'm going out!
Hey everybody, heading south on I-65 between Huntsville and Birmingham, and a thought struck me. I was reading the other night from the Gospel of Matthew, the story where Jesus walks on the water and then Peter requests that Christ let him come out on the water too, and to come towards him. And it's a story that I'm sure most of us are familiar with. The Apostle Peter steps out onto the water, a very bold thing to do, and then all of a sudden he starts getting distracted by the storm that is going on. There's wind, there's waves, there's rain, and he starts looking to the right and the left and seeing how turbulent the sea is, and he takes his eyes off of Christ, and immediately he starts sinking into the water. And I think that says a lot about the way that we're supposed to look at Christ in our life. Everybody has storms. I don't care who you are, I don't care what kind of life that you live, whether you're rich or you're poor, you live in the country, live in the city, whether you've got a lot of family, whether you have virtually no family, everybody's got storms. Everybody has things in their life that just don't go their way. Things that they have to deal with, whether it's money, whether it's sickness. Something happens to everybody on a pretty regular basis. And I think that where we start going wrong, where we start sinking, is when we start focusing on the waves, we start focusing on the rain, we start focusing on the storms in our life, rather than looking forward at Christ. Now, Peter already knew that the sea was stormy. He was in a boat. He was very aware of the fact that the storm was raging pretty heavy at that point. So, what happened? He started out right, and then when he stopped focusing on Christ and started focusing on the terrible things going on around him, when he started focusing on them and that became the focus, he became afraid and he started sinking. And that's kind of like driving in a lot of ways. If you focus too much on the storm, if you focus on what's going on around you, if you focus too much on the other cars or start looking behind you and worrying about that, then you're going to lose focus on your goal, and you're either going to go in the wrong direction or, unfortunately, much worse, you wind up wrecking. That's obviously not good. And so, just like Peter, I think that the point of that story is that we have to keep our eyes constantly focused on Christ. Are we aware of the storm? Sure. Do we do the best that we can to deal with the circumstances of our life? Absolutely. That's something that the Bible really helps us with. But there's a difference in being aware of the storm and doing something to deal with the storm and focusing on the storm. We focus on Christ. And if we focus on Christ, we have faith in Him that, yes, the storm is there. Yes, we know it's there. But that whatever the storm happens to throw at us, it'll be okay because our focus is on Christ. It's a question of our priorities, and it's also a question of, do you trust God enough to bring you through the storm? And if the answer is yes, then all we have to do is look at Christ, keep ourselves focused on Him, and walk straight ahead. And that is going to be a much better way to live than constantly worrying about whatever new wave or whatever new rain or whatever new wind shows up in our life. Keep our eyes focused on Christ and walking forward so that one day we reach Him.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Tactics. I really needed that break, I'm not going to lie, mostly to finish that Cinnabon cookie, so it's part of the reason I went to break. I want to be honest with my audience, and that is a big part of the reason that I had to just take 5 there and finish off that cookie, because it was calling to me. Like I said, it's like the siren song, but now in cookie form as well. But I do have to talk about one of the most remarkable stories that I have seen in a long time. You know, in this business, it becomes a daily grind. And the news keeps coming. It doesn't stop. There's always way more on the cutting room floor than there is that you actually get to talk about on the show. And the truth is, most of it's bad news. It just is. And it can grind on you. This is not one of those stories. This is one of those stories that it is a pleasure to bring to people. And part of the reason for that is because it's just a story that tells itself. It does a better job of explaining what I'd like to convey than I ever could. And what I'm talking about is a case that starts with an incredibly dark and gruesome beginning, and that's the way that we should feel about this. It's, of course, what happened with Brandt Jean. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with this story, this is the quick version. Brandt Jean, just a regular dude. I think he was 26 years old, so not much younger than me. Just sitting at home one night, eating ice cream, watching TV. And all of a sudden, in walks a police officer. With no warning, doesn't knock, doesn't yell police, just walks into his apartment while he's sitting there in his PJs, going to town on a bowl of ice cream, watching TV. And starts freaking out. Now, he has no idea why she's in his apartment. And then, because she's freaked out too, she pulls her weapon, shoots him, and doesn't kill him instantly, but eventually he dies. And then you have to think about it from the other perspective too. This Dallas police officer, a woman by the name of Amber Geiger, she's just come home, or to what she thinks is home. She's actually on the wrong floor and has walked into the wrong apartment, but she doesn't know that. She looks and sees some random guy sitting on her couch, or what she thinks is her couch, watching TV, eating ice cream, and can't figure out why, starts to freak out, pulls her weapon, and shoots to kill, which is what police officers are trained to do. When you see somebody and you believe that they are about to be aggressive, you shoot to kill, because once you've drawn your weapon, and this is true of civilian gunmen if they know what they're doing, they're not trying to take out somebody's kneecap, because you just don't do that. Once you've taken out a deadly weapon, you realize it has one function and it is designed to kill somebody, and that's what you're trying to do. I mean, until they invent guns like they have in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., where you can shoot somebody and it just knocks them out, which, I mean, science just isn't there yet. Until they invent those, that's how people are going to use firearms to defend themselves. So, from both perspectives, this is a horrible story. No matter how you slice it. But here's the thing. It would be bad enough if this just happened to a regular person. Geiger is not a regular person. She is a police officer who has taken an oath to serve and protect. They are expected to be better than us. They are held to a higher standard when it comes to defending themselves, dealing with matters of the law, keeping the peace of society. They're held to a higher standard and should be. As much as I love and revere our police officers, I mean, you guys know if you've been listening to me for any amount of time, not only my commentary, but also doing charity events to help police officers, that kind of thing. I love our police officers. And it's because I love our police officers that we should hold this standard. There is a reason that they hold that extra level of esteem, and that extra level of esteem also ought to come with a higher level of expectation and responsibility. There's no two ways about it. The case that wrapped up this week with Geiger and resulted in a murder conviction and 10 years in prison is 100% appropriate. Because given her training especially, this is something that would be irrational behavior for a normal person. Because even if I, as a concealed carry permit holder, walked into an apartment that I thought was mine but saw that it was not, if I walked in and saw a burglar, of course I would shoot, and shoot to kill. That's the reason I have my sidearm. But it would be very odd behavior for a burglar to be in pajamas eating ice cream, watching TV. Even if I did believe mistakenly that it was my apartment, I would at least assume that the guy is, I don't know, a hobo. and pull my gun on him and hold him there till authorities arrived, but I don't immediately take my firearm out and start shooting. So this is something that would be incorrect behavior, both philosophically and legally. This would be behavior that the rational man, which is a legal standard that is used all the time in courts, that the normal rational person would not engage in. And so the fact that a normal rational person would not engage in it is even made worse by the fact that this is not a normal person, this is a police officer. And the fact that she couldn't have at least held her gun out, threatening him, but not firing, is also incredibly disturbing. As far as I can tell, and I know that this is just my opinion, but it is an opinion that I apparently is backed up now by a murder conviction, she should be convicted for murder. That's not something that a normal person should do, much less a police officer. And yes, I understand that this thing was done without malice. I understand that it was done out of confusion. I don't know if the blood toxicity test came back negative, so it says there was nothing in her system. I believe that, and I think that that's correct, but I don't know. I'm a little bit hesitant. I think maybe she may have been on some kind of hallucinogen or something that wouldn't show up, because it just seems so odd to me that that would take place. It's so outside the norm even for a regular person. But nonetheless, that's neither here nor there. The point is that either way, a murder conviction is correct in this circumstance, as far as I can tell. And so, this is where we are. 10 years still seems a little bit light to me. But given that there was no malicious intent, so far as we know, and it was definitely not premeditated, and there is as of yet no reason for us to believe that it is premeditated, murder with 10 years, probably pretty close to right. If it had been murder and 20 years, again, no premeditation, no malice included in this case, 20 years would, I think, not be inappropriate if that had been what the jury decided. But the point is, the left has tried to make this into a race issue. And there's no reason to believe that that is the case. Right now, there is absolutely zero evidence that this was in any way race-related. They've tracked down text messages saying that, oh, well, she had some deep-seated underlying racism. Even if that were the case, even if there is a little bit of racism, you can't prove that she did this because the guy was black. There was one commentator that I watched, a local news commentator in Dallas, which I agreed with like 99% of what he said. But he said, but if it were a white guy sitting there, she wouldn't have shot. There's no way to know that. None of us can ever know that. And if it was racially motivated, there's no way to prove that it was or wasn't. And so because of that, you have to operate on the assumption that it was not that. But whether it was or not, it bothers me that we try to turn everything into a tribalist battle. And if you want to know what the solution to that is, I want you to watch this clip. This is a commentary, this is a testimony by the victim, Botham, by his brother, Brandt. So this is Brandt on the stage giving his testimony. And it is absolutely one of the most incredible videos I have seen. I have never seen anything like this in all my years of being in journalism, news commentary, all the way back to having graduated from Auburn. Never seen anything like this. I want to go ahead and show this to you, and I'm going to show you the full video, unedited, no commentary, just watch it for yourself. It speaks volumes. I don't even have to comment on it during the video. Go ahead and watch.
I don't want to say twice or for the 100th time what you've or how much you've taken from us. I think you know that. But I hope you go to God with all the guilt, the bad things you may have done in the past. Each and every one of us may have done something that we're not supposed to do. If you truly are sorry, I know I can speak for myself. I forgive you. And I know if you go to God and ask Him, He will forgive you. And I don't think anyone could say it. Again, I'm speaking for myself, not even behalf of my family. But I love you just like anyone else. And I'm not gonna say I hope you rot and die just like my brother did, but I personally want the best for you. And I wasn't gonna ever say this in front of my family or anyone, but I don't even want you to go to jail. I want the best for you. Because I know that's exactly what both of them would want you to do. And the best would be give your life to Christ. I'm not going to say anything else. I think giving your life to Christ would be the best thing that both of them would want you to do. Again, I love you as a person. And I don't wish anything bad on you. I don't know if this is possible, but can I give her a hug, please? Please?
Yes.
I don't even have to say anything. I mean, I'm completely at a loss just because how do you respond to that? And for those of you that have been watching me for any amount of time, you know catching me speechless is practically impossible to do. But the thing is, any commentary that I would give, any pearls of wisdom that I could offer in response to this would by great lengths fail in comparison to what you just saw play out there. I've got nothing. I will say this, because I found this fascinating, and this actually does add a little bit of context, which makes the clip itself more powerful. He had no idea the cameras were rolling. This wasn't done to gain fame or internet notoriety or because he thought that this was going to blow up. They revealed in interviews since then, he didn't even know the cameras were on or that he was being recorded at all. This is one of the most genuinely selfless acts I have ever seen from anyone. to be the victim of something like this, that you've had your own brother robbed from you, and to do that, to come down and embrace his killer. You can't find a better example anywhere. Maybe an equal example, but certainly not a better example of the kind of love of Jesus Christ dwelling in somebody than that. I mean, that is not quite to the level of Christ, of course, because we're just like us. Brandt is a flawed human being too. But I mean, if there's any part of the Bible that reminds me of, it's Christ asking God to forgive the people while they're murdering him. I mean, sure, maybe it's not quite to that level, but it's about the only Bible narrative that I can think of that is similar to that in certain ways. And just watching that, and I found this out later. I didn't know this until after I had seen that video. His family members and he are all members of the Church of Christ, a similar kind of church as the one that I go to. And apparently they're a Harding University family. The victim himself, Botham, actually went to Harding, as I understand it. Now, I'm getting this secondhand information, but that's what I had heard from somebody that I trust and is a reliable source, which I didn't know when I watched this. But whether they were or not, before I even knew that, I looked at this and said, that is putting the love of Christ on display in a way that I've never seen. And the truth is, I just assumed that they were members of some kind of church somewhere, had no idea that they were members of the same church that I belong to. And so that just dumbfounded me even more. But the fact that somebody can do that, I hope that one day, I may not live long enough to see this day, but I hope that one day I have that kind of compassion for other people. Because I'm going to tell you right now, I probably don't. I don't think I could have pulled that off. And I'm looking to this guy as an example to try to build my compassion towards other people, because I'm not there yet. I'll just be honest with you, I'm not. I wish I was, I'm not. And I think very few people are. But one thing that astounds me about that I think makes it even more impactful, is that he said in there that he was never going to say this in front of his family. Now, I don't know exactly what he meant by that. I don't know the man's heart. But based on what we saw in that video, and this is just my observation, I think what he meant was there are members of his own family, we don't know if he meant immediate family, extended family, whatever, that he knows would not have wanted him to do that, would not have wanted him to sit on the stand. Remember, this is before sentencing and could affect the sentencing verdict of the jury. That they would not have wanted him to say that, I don't even want you to go to jail. I just want you to give your life over to Christ. This is somebody that has removed every semblance of vengeance from his heart. Because other than maybe killing one of your children, I don't know that there's something worse than having someone kill your sibling. And I'm just trying to think of it, if somebody had taken my brother or sister from me, I think that with a lot of time and counseling and scripture reading and prayer, I could probably get to that point. I don't know that I would have been able to do so in the span of time that he's had since his brother's murder. And because of that, this inspires me to be a better person. it inspires me to further my own walk with Christ. Because this is somebody that has taken revenge completely out of his spiritual glossary. I mean, that part of his vocabulary is just gone at this point, so far as I can tell. And he has moved to the point that Christ was at, which is reconciliation. He doesn't want bad for her. He doesn't want anything terrible to happen. In his mind, it's not about getting away with something or making her feel bad to make himself feel better. This is one of the most selfless things I've ever seen any human being ever do. And that is not a small compliment. Because I've met some incredible, amazing people. But what amazes me about this is that this kind of compassion is contagious. And should be. In fact, and I don't know if this was affected by this or what order these events took place in, but the Dallas judge that oversaw this case, Tammy Kemp, she also went forward and hugged the murderer and went out to her car and gave her her own personal Bible. And this is the quote that she said when she handed the murderer her Bible. You just need a tiny mustard seed of faith. You start with this. That is where real forgiveness lies. Real healing. And this woman, Geiger, is not beyond repentance. Is not beyond God's love. She still has the ability to be forgiven of our sins from God and from others, as Brandt just displayed. And because of that, this young man made a conscious decision to look at her not as his brother's murderer, but as a fellow child of God that is as in much need of the forgiveness of Jesus Christ as he is. That is a hard thing to do. To remove what has been done to you and to think about what that person needs. That's something that Christians that have been Christians for decades have not been able to do with the level of ease that this man did. But unfortunately, there are people, I don't know how, but there are people that look at this and they want vengeance. That they're still about revenge and trying to do evil and wish evil upon this person, even though they're not the victim. And so, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, they are actually filing a formal complaint claiming that the judge violated the First Amendment by handing the victim her Bible. Now, I want you to remember, she didn't sentence the woman to read the Bible, nor did she say she has to read the Bible to get out on parole or anything like that. She just said, I understand that you need spiritual help, essentially. I'm paraphrasing here. This is how to get that help. That's it. Didn't force her to do it, didn't force her to take it. Offered it to her. The person took it, and now the Freedom from Religion Foundation is filing a formal complaint against this woman, trying to get her in legal trouble from the First Amendment violation. Well, first of all, like I said, she's not forcing anybody to read it, so this isn't any kind of legally forced proselytizing. But second of all, let me tell you about a man named John Jay. John Jay was there when the Constitution was written. He was not a signer of it, but he's one of the three authors of the Federalist Papers, which are the original argument for the passage of the Constitution. So he was intimately familiar with the structure of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. He was the first Supreme Court justice appointed by George Washington himself, The very first one. Very first Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice. You know what John Jay did in his New York courtroom? He fined a man. Remember, this is in the 1790s. He fined a man $5,000 for blaspheming Jesus. $5,000. That was a lot of money at that time. I mean, I don't know exactly what the inflation rate was, but it was a lot. So the idea that the freedom, the First Amendment somehow guarantees somebody that they will not, I don't even know how to phrase this, honestly. But the idea that the founders and the people who put the First Amendment into place would have opposed something like this when you understand that is patently absurd. And frankly, I'm not even 100% sure that I agree with John Jay on that. I think that he might have been overstepping his bounds there. Though I find it hard to argue with somebody with that level of credential on what the Constitution actually means. But nonetheless, the idea that the founders and the people who put this together would have opposed that? Sorry, you won't be able to convince me of that. Or any other objective person. And the Freedom from Religion Foundation is not the only one. Shaun King, a white guy that pretends to be a black person to boost his political career, he's kind of the original Beto O'Rourke. He is a white dude, and his parents are white, and if you look at pictures of him as a kid, he's clearly white and has almost strawberry blonde hair, but now pretends to be a black person and dresses like a black person so that people will read his tweets and his articles. He's worked for the Young Turks before. So that's who Shaun King is. The man's a phony from the beginning and always has been. This is his latest tirade and commentary on the whole thing. So, obviously there's part of this I can't read, but he says, ask yourself again, would Botham Jean have gotten, had he walked into a white woman's home while she was still in her pajamas eating ice cream and shot and killed her? Then texted his friends and refused to provide first aid. 10 years, no. He might have got the death penalty. I don't know if that's true or not, but the point is, how anybody can look at that situation and try to turn it into some tribalist, racist war between all of us. It amazes me that people have the ability to do that, and he's not the only one. Some attacking this act of extreme mercy and grace directly. This is a tweet, well, if it'll pop up. This is a tweet from a guy named Bishop Tabert Swan. And his caption of this whole thing is post-traumatic slavery syndrome, which is absurd on a number of levels, but primarily because anybody that understands the gospel of Christ, and this guy is no bishop, I don't know if that's his name or if that's supposed to be a title, but if this guy is purporting to be a follower of Christ, he is a bald-faced liar and will burn in hell for doing that, if this is his takeaway from that event. When he's saying post-traumatic slavery syndrome, you could not be further from the truth. Because true slavery to sin, is when you follow your own instincts and do whatever it is that you want in the moment. This is a guy that's saying there are people of my own family that don't agree with this synopsis. I am going to catch flack from people who I love just for saying this. But it's the right thing to do, so I'm going to do it anyway. He had to deny himself, which the Bible tells us to do. He had to deny his own instincts and what he wanted to do, that visceral revenge tactic, that natural reaction that all humans have. He had to actually forego that to be able to do what he did. And the takeaway from that ought to be, this man was as free as anybody can be. In that moment, he was as free as any human being can be. Because he has thrown all of his animalistic, sinful instincts to the side. Everything that would tell him, get her, hate her, destroy her, want what's worst for her. You should desire to tear her apart. You should want the worst sentence possible for her. That's what his instincts, I'm sure, because he's a human being, were telling him to do. He chose to do the exact opposite and go as far as you can in the other direction. If your instinct is to follow your own sinful impulses, you're the one that's a slave, not this guy. This is somebody that's ignoring those instincts to follow the gospel of Christ, that is ignoring his natural inclinations to do what is right and to follow God and be to conform to his image. This man's far freer than you ever will be if you continue to think this way. And this is the final one. White people have been using Christianity to gaslight us up until forgiving them for white supremacy since the ships arrived. The grace given to Amber Geiger after killing Brandt Jean is no different. Well, first of all, this guy doesn't understand grace. Because grace is unmerited favor. Of course, Geiger doesn't deserve this treatment. No human being deserves that level of grace from another person or from God. That's the point of grace. If you deserve it, it's not grace. The forgiveness that is being offered here is not because she earned it, because if she earned it, there would be no need for the grace in the first place. This is somebody that doesn't understand the teachings of Christ, all three of these people. And I watched this narrative play out, and I thought, how can people see that and be so unaffected by it? See that and still want vengeance and vitriol? Think about that. These are people that, even though I genuinely believe that they care about Brandt Jean, or at least I want to assume the best in them, and so I'm going to do that. I'm just going to give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that they do actually care about Brandt Jean. Okay. Well, you may have cared about him in the sense that you care about all people, but you didn't know him. You're looking at somebody who had grown up with him, who had known him his entire life. This was his brother. He's the victim. He's the one that has had a part of him, a part of his family ripped out of his life forever and can't get him back. And he can find it in him. He can find it in himself to forgive this woman, and you can't? And how anyone can watch that and thumb their nose at an act of extreme mercy and grace like that was just completely lost on me. And then I remembered a very specific passage of scripture in the Bible. And once I read this and remembered it and looked through it, it makes perfect sense. It follows right along with it. 1 Corinthians 1:18 through 25. For the word of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the cleverness of the clever I will set aside. Where is the wise man? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made the foolishness of the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God the world through its wisdom did not come to know God, God was well pleased through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. For indeed Jews ask for signs and Greeks search for wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, to Jews a stumbling block and to Gentiles foolishness. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. You see, you can tell by their tweets. You can tell by their vitriol. You can tell by the way that they look at this and go, that guy's naive. He's weak. He's not going after her the way that he ought to. That's what these verses are talking about. The world looks at that action and they don't see compassion. Or they do, but they don't see compassion as a good thing. And so they thumb their nose at it. They look down on it. They don't understand it. Why? That verse explains it. The world is not going to understand the mercy and compassion of Jesus Christ. They can't. Because unless you're there, unless you've been forgiven and you see yourself as a flawed individual that is in desperate need of forgiveness just like everybody else, you can't get to that point. Until you see yourself as the person who is not the victim, but instead the perpetrator. Until you see the hatred in your own heart. Until you see the pride in your own heart as something that harms others and has earned you eternal damnation. And the only way to get out of that is through mercy and grace. Then you're not going to see yourself in the eyes of the perpetrator. You're not going to be able to relate to that person. All you see is that you got offended, you got harmed, and because of that, you want to do whatever it was they did to you back to them. That's all you can see. That's what it means to live like the world. If you want to know how to live like Christ, do what this guy did. Extend grace to people who don't deserve it, who haven't earned it, who every instinct in your body is saying, don't do it. Do what you want to do. Get back at them. And then there's Christ standing there saying, I forgave you. Forgive other people the way that I forgave you. That is how to understand forgiveness. That's how somebody gets to this point, that they can embrace their own brother's murderer. It's the only way that you can. Because while everybody else sees foolishness in mercy and weakness in forgiveness, those of us that understand Christ understand that in defeat, in being the victim, he became the conqueror. The greatest human tragedy that has ever been perpetrated is when the Jewish elders and the Romans murdered the world's most perfect person for crimes that he did not commit. And in that very moment, he was still able to say, Father, forgive them because they don't understand what they're doing. That's the level of grace and mercy that we're supposed to see in Christ. Yeah, the world looks at that as a massive loss. The world looks at that as, this guy died on a cross. Why would you follow that person? The world sees it that way. We're not supposed to. We look at that and see strength. And anybody that has not had their heart turned completely to stone looks at that video and sees strength. Looks at that video and sees mercy and forgiveness and wants to be like that guy. To anybody that still has a soul within them, that's what they see. But even these people that don't see that, those hearts of stone can be turned back into hearts of flesh with time. And by being shown the love of Christ. I've been a minister for 15 years now. Preached who knows how many sermons. Taught literally thousands of Bible classes. I would not be at all shocked if I've actually taught more than 1,000 Bible classes at this point. I have a daily talk show where I do devotionals at the end of every single one. I've been speaking to thousands of people at one time, both over broadcast and live. I have a really big platform compared to most Christians. I guarantee you that in 15 years of being a Christian, I have not done enough. I've not done as much as this guy did in 3 minutes and 30 seconds to convince people of the love of Christ. There are going to be people all around the world that look at that and say, okay, there may be something to this Christian thing. If that's the kind of love and peace that you can find by being a Christian, then maybe I ought to look into it. I'm not saying that the work that the rest of us are doing isn't good. I think that I hope that I've done a decent amount of good in my lifetime. But I don't think any of it measured up to that. Because, yeah, I can give you all the context of, whatever book of the Bible that you want. I can give you some extra historical information. I can academically convey to you a lot more about the Bible than the vast majority of the population. Guarantee you, I can't come anywhere close to convincing people the way that guy just did in 3 minutes. He's done more for the kingdom in that amount of time than I probably will my entire life. Good. I hope that stays true. And if he's watching this, and I doubt that he is, Botham, you're one of my role models now. And I hope that I get to the spiritual level that you're at right now. God bless you, man. Let's go to the chaplain's report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
And we're back. Chaplain's Report today. I'm not going to be able to top what I just talked about. I'm just not. Like I said, I've been doing these Chaplain's Report. There's hundreds of them now. I guarantee you, all of them combined haven't done as much to convince people of the love of Christ as that 3-minute video does. And I'm saying that not poor-mouthing. I think my stuff's pretty good. It doesn't come close to that. But I do have something I want to convey in the Chaplain's Report, and it really ties into both things that we talked about. It ties into what Nikki Haley was talking about, and it definitely ties in to what we just saw in with Brandt Jean. To really understand this passage, you need to know that the Church of Philippi, they had fallen in to following worldly leaders. They had started following people that were not reputable, that they were making decisions based on worldly standards. They were starting to bring in parts of paganism and trying to integrate them into Christianity. That they were all into food and all kinds of pleasures of the flesh, that kind of thing. And Paul was about ready. He'd had enough of it, and he wanted to convey them the danger in following such people. And so this is the passage that Paul writes in Philippians 3:14 through 17. I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. Let us therefore, as many as are perfect, have this attitude, and if in anything you have a different attitude, God will reveal that also to you. However, let us keep living by that same standard to which we have attained. Brethren, join in following my example, and observe those who walk according to the pattern you have in us. Now, Paul, I find this part of the letter absolutely fascinating because of a couple things. First, he says, follow my example, and that you have a pattern in us. When he says us, he's talking, of course, about the apostles, himself, Peter, the other church leaders that are there. And upon first glance, don't you look at that and think, that's a little arrogant, Paul. You're saying, everybody follow what I'm doing. You see me doing it, you need to be doing it too. You see my fellow apostles, you see Peter and Matthew and all the other, you see what they're doing, you do what they do. The first inclination of that isn't that arrogant? But then you remember that Paul refers to himself as the chiefest among sinners. Paul was not somebody that saw himself as perfect. He was far from it. He said, if anything, I'm the worst one out of all of you. There's another passage that we won't go into right now because it's not our key passage of the day. But a brief summary of it is, look, I used to murder Christians and did it with a clear conscience. That's who Paul was. And now he is out there in the church telling them, you follow my example. You do what I'm doing, you do what the apostles are doing. That's what you're supposed to do. That doesn't make any sense unless you understand the transformation that Paul went through. You see, in saying this, Paul knows that he is an imperfect person. He knows that he messes up. He knows that he is as flawed as anybody in the church. So much so that people were afraid that he was some kind of plant and it was a conspiracy when he first joined because of how zealous he was in murdering Christians. He wanted to stamp Christianity off the face of the planet. That's who Paul used to be. And now he's the one saying, all you Christians, yeah, you do what I'm doing. You follow my pattern. Why? Because if you're reading this particular passage, you understand, because look back at verse 14, that I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Jesus Christ. Yeah, he's telling him, follow my example. You know why? Because he's following Christ's example. This is a pattern that flows forth for all of biblical ministry. We're supposed to be examples to other people, but we can only be that example if we're following the true example. We can help other people out. We can help exemplify for them the traits that Jesus Christ had, but we can only do it if we're following Christ. And by the way, this is the way that all biblical leadership works. Why are the elders, and there are passages to back up each one of these, why are the elders to be modeled after? Why are you supposed to follow what the elders are doing? Because they're following what Christ told them to do. Why are you following what your husband's doing? Because he is the representative of Christ in our household. Why is it that children should listen to their mother? Because she's following the example of Christ. Why is it that young men in the church ought to be following what the older men in church are doing? Because they are supposed to be following the example of Christ. It all goes back to that. It's the same answer every single time. We can be examples to others. Just like we saw in that video a few minutes ago. Just like Nikki Haley saw in her own mother. It only works when you're following the example of Christ. That's how to be an example to another person. That's how other people look at you and say, I'm doing what he's doing. I'm having what he's having. If you're living the way that Christ called us to, if we're pressing up towards that call, then there are going to be other people that look at us and say, hey, I can do it too. And that's what Jesus always intended. You'll notice that all throughout the gospel, Jesus never told anybody how to be saved. I mean, he instructed them. But after he was gone, after that ascension, you didn't hear voices coming from heaven where Jesus was telling people what to do. Even with Paul. If you look in the conversion story of Paul in the book of Acts, he tells Paul to go to a certain person, a Christian, and he will tell you what you need to do to be saved. This was always Jesus' plan. So yeah, Jesus is the perfect example that we're all supposed to follow. But here on earth, we as Christians are supposed to fulfill at least a part of that role. And we can only do that if we're following the perfect example of Christ. And so this is the reason that Brandt Jean, the reason that he's inspiring so many people, not because he's so great, even though I think that he is pretty great, it's because he is following the example of Christ. That's what people find compelling. That's what people look at. If he didn't have the teachings of Christ in his life, I guarantee you there's no way he would have been able to do that. No way. Forgiveness and mercy are actually fairly new concepts. If you're looking at the pre-Christian world, and the part of the world that still doesn't have a Christianity, forgiveness is not something that's held up as a virtue. In fact, in many cultures, it's viewed as pretty negative. Like you're just letting somebody get away with something. Christianity was the first religion to look at forgiveness as a good thing, that espoused it as something that we ought to be striving for. And so you're looking at this. Paul is telling us that you follow my pattern and the pattern that we've set out for you because we're following Christ. Sometimes when you're walking along, you can't necessarily see the person at the front of the line, but you know where they are and you know where they're heading because you're following the person in front of you. Now, that person in front of you may have no idea where they're going, but as long as they're following a leader that does, in this case Christ, then following them is okay. Now, you got to be careful because there are going to be some people that tell you that they're following Christ and really aren't. But the point is, as long as you find somebody that is genuinely following Christ, then you can follow them and be sure that you're going to be led in a good direction. And here's the thing. There's probably somebody behind you following as well. And that ought to inspire us to be the best that we can be so that other people don't get led astray. And so when I see examples like this of a person, the love of Christ dwelling in them and that being exemplified in the video we watch, where you can even go to the point where you can forgive and genuinely desire the best for a person that murdered a member of your own family, that's the kind of example that I want to follow. And the reason that I want to follow that example is because that's the kind of person that I eventually want to be. Because I want to be following the true example of Jesus Christ. And I pray that in my life there will be other people that look to me and see that example being played out and they follow the pattern that I set forth as well. If I do that, then I will have led a very, very successful life. Stay the course, friends.
Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Any opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media. The theme song for Tactics is 6 Foot Town by Big and Rich. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Broadcast studios provided by Cumulus Media Montgomery. Location studios provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ.